crash that happened yesterday, which is June 12th, of Air India AI1717.
It took off from Ahmedabad, destined for London.
What do you think can be the possible root causes for this particular attack?
One of the things we see from the video is the flight goes all the way to the edge of the runway, and it actually takes off from the edge of the runway because you can see a lot of dust, which tells you that probably the plane did not get the kind of lift. This same aircraft, when it came before this flight, just the flight before, multiple passengers reported that there were electrical problems in the plane. It is powered by the same 235 volt main power system, which actually powers a lot of these components which might have gone wrong. Few years back, I forget, maybe 3-4 years back, there were two crashes that happened because Boeing wanted to produce a very fuel efficient version of 737. In order to accommodate these engines, they had to make some tweaks in the airframe. Now the problem was that Boeing did not make this information available to all the pilots, because if Boeing said that there is this FCAS system which is new and it can do this sort of things, then the pilots have to be retrained. If the pilots have to be retrained, then that's a cost to the airlines, right? So Boeing was under pressure from a lot of airlines who did not want this information.
So, hey guys, thank you so much to be in my channel. It's called Mindfulness with Manish. Today is very sad for aviation history. One of the most important topic we will talk about is a crash that happened yesterday, which is June 12th, of Air India AI1717, which was taking from Ahmedabad to London. So we will talk about all of that, what basically happened, how that happened. We will do more deep dive into the root causes and the history of Air India as well as Boeing. So to talk about that, again we have Subhashish with us. Subhashish is a an enthusiast in civil aviation, as well as he has a lot of interest into planes and the history and how the planes are made and things like that. So whenever I have a conversation with Subhashish, we always have a deep dive conversation about like different companies that make planes, how they are made, what things goes into the planes and things like that. So that's why I thought it's a good topic for Subhashish to bring in my channel. And Subhashish has been in our channel for many topics. He has talked about things like spirituality, job market, the recent attack which happened in Pahalgaon, which you might have seen. This is another topic which we will touch base. So again, let's start. Thank you, Subhashish, to be in my channel.
Thank you, Manish, for inviting me in your channel.
Thank you. So let's start with the topic, which is the tragedy that happened in the history of civil aviation. We will talk about what went wrong and the crashes. So let's talk about the basics. So what exactly happened? If you can elaborate that in your own words.
Sure. So on, I think, June 12th,
Yesterday.
in India, a Boeing 787-8 flight of Air India, I think it is AI171. It took off from Ahmedabad, destined for London. I think it was between 1 o'clock and 2 o'clock in the local time. And very short while into its flight, it just took off. The whole duration of the flight was less than 1 minute, I think 58 seconds or something like that. It crashed, and it crashed into a medical college building where at the time of the crash there were a lot of doctors or trainee doctors who were eating lunch, I think. It crashed into that building. The aircraft was carrying 242 people, 230 passengers, 10 crew members, and 2 pilots. So 242 people in the aircraft, and there were a lot of people on the ground as well. So the plane crashed into that building. We do not know yet exactly how many people died, how many people survived. What we know is in the airplane there was just one passenger, a British citizen, who miraculously survived the crash. He was sitting A11A.
11A, yeah.
So the whole plane crashed and literally burned. Uh, the aircraft, I think, had 110 or 110,000 gallons of fuel in it. It was a very heavy aircraft. There was a lot of fuel because it was going for a 10-hour journey, and it crashed right after the takeoff. So you can imagine all that fuel. And it was a hot day in Ahmedabad. And the crash also caused huge temperature in the body of the aircraft. So, in that kind of heat, with that kind of fuel, it was very hard for any survivors of that crash. So, what we know so far is only one person survived from the plane, and we don't yet exactly know how many people survived on the building and how many people died. But it's a very catastrophic event, and it's a very sad event.
Yeah, basically what rightly mentioned, it's a very sad event. So it was our morning. We live in the US. So when I woke up, I first thing I do is like looking at the news, and first thing was like this crash, and then I was like, what? Like 240 or something people died. That was very saddening, and then one person survived. So I look at the video. So basically, the plane took off like casual, and then we see a sudden decline in the plane. That's the video which surfaced. I think let's talk about the videos that surfaced. That's one video which we CCTV footage of the plane, so taking off and going down. Another footage which I saw was of that guy who got survived. So he came out of the plane, and then somebody was taking a video of him. He was going towards the ambulance, and then the media and all, they went to the hospital and interviewed him. So those were few things, few videos that surfaced around. um, Talking about like the root causes, right? What do you think exactly? I know like the DGCA is still researching. We still found, we just got like the black box. What do you think can be the possible root causes for this particular attack?
Yeah, so there were some other videos also. There were a couple of guys who were standing on a rooftop who probably captured the clearest video of the moment of crash. So that is one video. There were some other videos of some folks who were standing near the edge of the airport, and they were just taking a video of an aircraft which was taking off, which was AI-171. So we have seen multiple videos. Now, as to what could be the reason, like what could be the root cause which caused this crash, DGCA is currently doing the investigation. As you said, they have recovered the black box. And other than DGCA, because Boeing, it is a 787 Dreamliner, so it's a US made aircraft. So, most likely FAA, which is a US body, and NTSB, which does all accident investigations in the US. So, either only FAA or maybe even NTSB, in addition to FAA, they might be involved because the aircraft was going to London. So the European bodies will also be involved. So I think we will see that there would be an investigation which will have FAA, which will have the European body, which will have DGCA. So there would be several bodies which would be involved. And whenever this sort of crashes happen, at the best case, I think it would take some time. It may take 1 or 2 years to fully, for all the professionals and investigators to fully figure out what happened. Even, when you have a very sophisticated aircraft like 787, which crashes and everybody dies, usually it is not one thing that causes it. Usually there is a sequence of events which goes wrong. One thing alone cannot bring down such a sophisticated aircraft. It has to be a sequence of things which together, when they go bad, it results into that kind of a catastrophic outcome. Now, we should not speculate, we should let the investigation happen, right? But I think based on the video evidence, based on the audio evidence, based on what is known generally around aviation, there are some educated guesses that we can make. We can talk about the possibilities, like what may have happened, and we can talk about more generally possibilities, like if not specifically this one, but if a crash of this sort happens, possibly what might have caused it. And then we can, based on the audio evidence and video evidence, we can even rule out some of the
Yeah.
possibilities. We can say maybe based on the video evidence this is not the case. Like for example, one of the possibilities is that both the engines failed because there were bird strikes. Maybe a flock of birds was passing around that area, and multiple birds might have gotten ingested into the two
Yeah.
engines, and simultaneously both engines failed. But based on the video evidence,
There
based
was no
on,
birds. There was no like fire coming out of the engine.
yes, there were no birds in that area at that time. There were no carcasses found. There was no black smoke coming out of the engine. So, based on these evidences, there are some theories which we can rule out, and we
Hmm.
can say maybe this is not a
So
possibility.
let's rule out the possibilities.
Yeah.
Let's do some brainstorming.
Yeah.
The first thing is there was no bird crash on the plane,
Yes, there were
right?
no birds ingested in the engines.
Even the government confirmed there was no birds' wings or something found in the park wherever the crash happened, and there was no remains of the birds around the engine. So that is one.
DGCA confirmed it.
DGCA confirmed it.
Yes.
Second is let's talk about the pilot experience.
Yeah. So the captain had, I think, 8,200 flight hours of
Yeah,
experience.
8,200. Yeah,
And then the first officer, the other pilot, you can say the co-pilot, he had, I think, 1100.
1,100. So the name is Sumit Sabharwal and second is Kundar.
Okay.
8,200 and 1,100 hours.
So together there were, and I think that experience on a Dreamliner, like they had that experience on a Dreamliner. Maybe they were even more experienced. They might have experience on other aircraft types, but we know that on Dreamliner they had this much experience, right? So they are very experienced aviators. DGCA has also said that the possibility of a pilot error is minimal,
Hmm.
and it is so soon into takeoff, and a very sophisticated modern aircraft like Dreamliner has so many safety features built into the system. It is pretty hard for such experienced aviators, in the presence of so many safety systems in Dreamliner, it is very hard for them to make a mistake.
Hmm.
So DGCA, what they have mentioned in their initial report, initial release, public information release, what they have said is the chance of a pilot error is minimal.
Got it. Okay. So those were two things which we can disregard: pilot and bird, right?
Yes, pilot error and like birds destroying the engine. Now,
Can
and
birds actually destroy the plane? Like, is it responsible for plane crash? Has it happened in the past?
yes, there have been many plane crashes which have happened when a plane is flying, and it usually happens when the plane is trying to land or a plane is trying to take off, because a plane cruises at more than 30,000 feet of altitude, like 35,000 feet or 41,000 feet. So you don't expect birds at that altitude. But when you are taking off or when you are landing, that is when you are vulnerable to bird strikes. So what can happen is one bird or a set of birds, they might be flying, and because jet engine, it creates a lot of thrust, right? So it pulls a lot of air. So birds can get ingested into the engine, and it can cause problems with the engine blade, and it can cause structural damage, because that impact is happening at a very high speed. Like the aircraft may be flying at a few hundred kilometer per hour speed at that point, right?
Hmm.
So at a very high speed, if you have an impact, even if you have a at a very high speed, even if you have an impact with a small piece of stone, it can cause catastrophe because of the kinetic energy,
Hmm.
right? So a bird getting into the engines have brought down aircrafts before. Perhaps the most famous incident involves Captain Sully,
Hmm.
who was flying an Airbus A320, and they were going to land in New York, and there was a flock of birds which was going, and those, like multiple birds got ingested into both the engines. Both the engines simultaneously failed, but the Hudson River was there, and Captain Sully ditched the plane into the Hudson River, and not a single person died. Everybody survived. It was a miraculous crash landing, because when you are crash landing into water, also, the chances of survival is low, because if you don't ditch it absolutely perfectly, the impact of the water can break the aircraft,
Hmm.
and there may be fatalities, right? But Captain Sully, why this is a very, very famous aviation incident is because Captain Sully somehow managed to land the plane. I mean, on water, you don't say land. He ditched the plane
Hmm.
in water in such a way that the plane was stable on the water and not a single person died.
Interesting.
Everybody was evacuated, but it happens. But what DGCA is saying, or what the investigators have found so far, is there is no evidence of any bird activity. The other thing also is that the chances of both the engines failing simultaneously, Dreamliner engines, like such modern engines, both the engines failing simultaneously, the probability is more, like less than 1 in a billion. So it is highly improbable that both the engines failed at the same time.
Hmm. Yeah, that's a thing. Also, there has been a history with Dreamliner and Boeing, right? People have told that, and there was a whistleblower telling that there's a problem with the company planes, there's malfunction and things like that. Maybe you can touch base on that as well.
Yeah, so I think there are like two different aspects, right? So one thing is that a company can do their best, but aviation is so challenging. There are so many scenarios which you cannot think of when you are designing an engine or when you are designing an aircraft. So every company which is manufacturing aircrafts or manufacturing engines, they go to great lengths to test the aircraft or test the wings or test the engine under extreme duress, under extreme circumstances. But even then, there are times when something unforeseen happens and the plane experiences a situation which nobody could have imagined.
Hmm.
Hence, the engines of the plane is not designed to withstand that situation, and a crash happens. And then in the investigation, when regulators find out that what caused that accident, then there would be improvements, or there would be new designs
Yeah.
which ensure that such a accident doesn't happen. So there is that case. The second case is there could be negligence by a aircraft manufacturer in how the aircraft is assembled. There can be quality issues. So the whistleblowers who have talked about Boeing, what they have talked about is the second scenario, where the whistleblowers were quality assurance engineers, and what they said is they saw a lot of quality issues when several parts of the aircraft fuselage were fused together. There were some gaps. There were those gaps we are talking about are very, very small gaps, like the breadth of a hair. But you can imagine when you are flying at 30,000 plus feet, 40,000 feet, when there is so much engine compression, such a small gap can completely destroy the airplane, right? In some cases, the whistleblowers talked about the parts which were used, or the things which were used to assemble the plane. uh, I would talk about a screwdriver. A screwdriver doesn't get used, but just to give you an idea, like whatever machine you are using to put together the fuselage together, the whistleblower also mentioned that in some cases those things were left inside the
Hmm.
fuselage. Or you can't see it; it is in between the gaps and stuff like that. So there was this level of negligence or lack of like quality control. So one thing is that there may be, Boeing has had in the recent past, first with 737 Max, and whistleblowers have come out, and like Max has had multiple fatal crashes. And the problem with 737 Max is very well documented. Like, it is a fatal flaw in the design of the aircraft. So like Boeing has a lot to be accountable for, that they actually pushed into production an aircraft which has such fatal flaws in design, right?
737 Max is a Boeing aircraft.
Yes.
That crash happened when?
So few years back, I forget, maybe 3 4 years back, there were two crashes that happened. In both the crashes, all the passengers died. So 737 Max, like you said, detail. This topic has a lot of detail, so I'll try to give you a very brief summary. So because Boeing wanted to produce a very fuel efficient version of 737, they put in high bypass turbo engines into Max. These were very big engines. In order to accommodate these engines, they had to make some tweaks in the airframe. Ideally, they should have redesigned the airframe, but they did not redesign the airframe. In place of that, they moved the position of the engines. Now, in the positions they moved their engines to, because they were big engines and they had to accommodate that. Because of, like change in position of those engines, the airframe did not remain stable anymore. So the airframe was such that because of the weight of the engines when the plane is flying, the nose might pitch up. And if the nose pitches up, the airplane may stall. You can have an aerodynamic stall. So what Boeing did to compensate for this design flaw is they designed a flight control system. It is called FCAS. That flight control system is always monitoring whether the nose is pitching up, whether it can cause a stall. When it notices that the nose is pitching up and it can cause a stall, it makes the nose of the aircraft pitch down. So it will make the nose of the aircraft pitch down like this. Now, the problem was that Boeing did not make this information available to all the pilots. Because if Boeing said that there is this FCAS system which is new and it can do this sort of things, then the pilots have to be retrained. If the pilots have to be retrained, then that's a cost to the airlines, right? So Boeing was under pressure from a lot of airlines who did not want this information to be included in the flight manual, because if it is mentioned in the flight manual, then there would be additional time that you have to train the pilots.
Yeah.
But poor pilots like who went through this crash or who went through these incidents where the nose is pitching down, like they did not have this information from
Yeah.
Boeing, right? So this caused two aircrafts which took off to crash because the sensors which are sensing whether the nose is pitching up, if one of the sensors malfunction, and if you don't have redundant sensors, so aircrafts they have pitot tubes, and the pitot tubes basically have air entering the pitot tubes and exiting the pitot tubes. With that they determine the airspeed, right? So a pitot tube is used along with software which can tell you at what pace the plane is going. Is the plane pitching up, is the plane pitching down? Ideally you should have three pitot tubes in a aircraft, but in some cases where the planes crashed, there was a single pitot tube because the aircraft company did not want to buy a plane with three pitot tubes. It probably saves some cost. So these aircrafts had a single pitot tube. That single pitot tube did not produce the right information. So the plane thought that the plane is getting into a stall. So the plane caused, the FCAS system caused the plane to dive. And then in order to break the dive, pilots have to pull the yoke with 50 pounds weight. Like if you pull the yoke with 50 pounds, then it was override to the FCAS system. It will break the dive. But this is the information that the pilots have to be told. In the
Yeah.
cases where the crashes happened, this information was
Was
not
not told.
documented.
Yeah.
So the pilots did not know.
So you are talking about the crash that happened for 737.
Two crashes that happened for 737 Max. And there was another famous incident last year with an Alaska Airlines flight where it took off from, I think, Portland. And there was a door, it was a structural door, which was actually not a door from outside because they had sealed it. They did not want a door over there in a high density configuration. But there was this structural door which blew up when the plane was airborne. Luckily, nobody died. Luckily, nobody was sitting in a seat next to that door. So, nobody died and the plane was able to land with everybody safely. But when they investigated, they found out that the door was not fixed with bolts. So, some of the bolts were missing. So you have a nut and you have a bolt which is going to fasten it, right? But when Boeing assembled the plane, they put the nut, but they did not tighten it with the bolt. The bolts were missing. So there are cases like this. So I talked about the 737 Max situation where there is flaw in design, which they tried to counteract with FCAS system. So sometimes there are design problems. Sometimes there are assembly or manufacturing problems, like what happened with Alaska Airlines, right?
Yeah.
So what the whistleblowers are talking about is some cases they are talking about quality control is lacking, right? But broadly, if you look at it, there may be a flawed design in an aircraft like Max. There could be quality issues like what the whistleblowers mentioned or what we saw with that, door bursting away. But there are also situations where, with the best intention, the aircraft manufacturer, designed and manufactured an aircraft, but still some problem happened which nobody could have predicted. Like there was a 777 which crashed very close to the runway in London Heathrow a few years back. And the reason the plane crashed was because both the engines simultaneously failed
It was during the takeoff or landing?
during landing. Right before landing, when it was in its final approach, both the engines simultaneously failed, and that aircraft crashed maybe 1 kilometer short of the runway or some distance. I don't remember the exact distance. But luckily, it was like a grassy patch. It was a green grassy patch in London where the plane crash landed, and the pilots crash landed it in such a way that not a single person lost their lives. So initially, Boeing said there was nothing wrong with the plane or the engines. It took a long time for investigators to find out that when a 777 aircraft with the engines that it had, when it goes through certain atmospheric patterns, certain turbulences, certain atmospheric patterns, ice builds up.
Hmm.
In the line which is producing fuel to the engine,
Yeah.
in that line, sometimes ice can build up. And if ice builds up, then the fuel doesn't go to the engine.
We're talking about high altitude, right?
In high altitude,
When the temperature is very low.
where the temperature is very low, and it is not always this happens. So what the investigators and what Boeing found out is, in some cases, if a certain pattern is repeated, if a certain atmospheric pattern is repeated only with the specific atmospheric pattern, like you took off, then you went to a cruising altitude, then you faced a certain kind of turbulence, you faced certain temperatures, you faced certain cloud patterns, then you landed. Only when that very, very specific pattern is happening, then ice can build up in the fuel line which is producing the fuel to the engine, and the engines can shut down because it's not getting fuel. This was actually responsible for the crash that happened. So it took a lot of investigation and a lot of genius to find it out, and 777s are safer now because Boeing and the engine manufacturers, they remedied that situation. So what they did is they have a heat pump which would heat the fuel in such a way that of course it's not going to cause the fuel to catch fire, but it would keep it heated in such a way that ice formation doesn't happen for the engine bay, like the fuel going to the engine, it doesn't get iced out, so that there is a temperature which is maintained. I think they also installed some nets in such a way that ice formation could not take place. So there are accidents like this which happen not because there was any like fault from the airplane
We just
manufacturer.
find it out.
You just find it out in time that something like this could happen. So there are situations
But
like
usually that costs a lot of lives of people, right? So that's a problem with this industry. I've seen. So you, according to you, 777 is a safer flight than 787. Is it right now?
I mean, it is hard to say. Like, if you look at a Dreamliner 787, this is the first fatal crash in a 787. But there has been multiple fatal crashes in 777. Like, 777 and 787 both are incredibly safe by safety standards, right? Like, I think there have been more than 1 billion people who have been transported by a Dreamliner so far. There are, I think, 1,100 Dreamliners which are flying, right? But we had the first hull loss, the first fatal crash that has happened. So statistically, these are very, very safe flights, statistically. But what some of the whistleblowers have said, like they have said that there are humongous concerns they have with the safety of these aircrafts because of alleged quality issues when the planes are assembled. I have seen some of the engineers in Boeing also say that they would never let their relatives or they
Travel.
themselves fly in a Boeing. So they have said things like
So
that.
if they can't, okay, how many countries, how many companies operate or make planes, right? One is Boeing, second is Airbus. These are two US based companies?
No, Airbus is European. It's
Oh,
a
Airbus is
France-based
European.
company.
Okay.
So Boeing historically used to be the number one, the biggest company. Airbus used to be the second biggest company. But of late, Airbus has become the number one company by sales, and Boeing is number two. In addition to these two, you have Bombardier, which is a Canadian company. You have Embraer, which is a Brazil based company. There is also a Chinese company, I think it is a state-funded company which has made the C series of planes which are which they hope one day will become competitors, big competitors to Boeing and Airbus.
Okay.
And then there are some passenger aircrafts from Russia, but the Russian planes or the Chinese planes haven't caught up in the market. Like they haven't caught on. Embraer and Bombardier, they have some planes, but they don't have, the kind of planes we are talking about: 787, 777, or Airbus's A350, A340, A330, or A380, Boeing 747, all big aircrafts, jumbo aircrafts which
It
fly
takes around
internationally.
250, 300 people.
250, 300, 400, 500 people. In this range, it is just Boeing and Airbus. Other manufacturers make smaller planes, like 100 people, 70 people.
Small planes, yeah.
Yeah.
So coming back to the original discussion, we were ruling out some of the root causes that did not take place,
Yes.
that did not cause the crash of this airline, Air India 171.
Which possibly did not. We would
With
know in
possibly,
that.
we will
Yeah,
know
yeah,
as the time goes on. Let's talk about the possibility of the crash.
yeah.
Yeah, so let's talk about some pointers. What do you think about can possibly cause the crash?
So there are mainly, like if you look at what we know so far, mainly there are three theories. One theory is that from the video and from some of the photographs, it looks like the flaps were not fully deployed.
Hmm.
So you have the wing of an aircraft, then flaps are the things which come from the
From the edge of the
uh,
wings.
from the rear part of the wings. They
Yeah.
come down,
Come down and come down.
and then you have slats which come from the front, right? So when when the slats are deployed and the flaps are extended, then what happens is the wing gets a shape like this.
Yeah,
So
like a bird.
like a bird, how a bird will arch its wings,
Yeah.
right? So it produces more lift. You get more lift if you don't have the flaps extended. If the flaps are, so you get 5-degree extension, 10-degree, you get 15-degree flaps, right? So if the flaps are at 15 degrees, the flaps are extended quite a bit, so you'll get more lift. If the flaps are at 5 degree, you will get less lift, right? So when a plane is taking off or when a plane is landing, when you need more lift or more control on how you are flying, because you may be flying at a less airspeed. When you are flying at a less airspeed, you need more lift, right? So flaps are used. So what experts are saying is, looking at the videos, many experts are saying maybe flaps were not deployed, or flaps may be deployed less, like maybe 5% of the flaps, or 5 degrees the flaps were deployed, but maybe they needed to deploy the flaps at 15 degrees. So some things we need to keep in mind is that it was a very heavy aircraft. There were 110,000 gallons of fuel in the aircraft. It was a full aircraft. There were 242 people, and it was a very hot day in Ahmedabad. So the air was very thin. It was difficult to get lift. So the first theory is there was a problem because the flaps were wrong, right? The second theory is that whether it was due to bus strike, which has now been ruled out, there may be simultaneous engine failure. Both engines failed and the plane could not get the lift. The third theory is there was a pilot error. So DGCA has said that the chances of a pilot error is minimal. The chances of both engines simultaneously failing
Is also minimal.
is also minimal, and they have ruled out there were no bird strikes. So that leaves us with mainly two possibilities. One possibility is probably the experts are right. The flaps were probably not fully deployed. Now, why that would be, we don't know. It is possible that pilots did not put the right flaps, but
But they're experienced pilots, right? They must have done. But I think the connection to the flaps and the switch or electricity might be off.
so there could be some problems, like maybe that they actually set the right configuration, but somehow there was, as you said, there is electrical systems, there is software system, there is electronic systems, there is mechanical systems, there is hydraulic systems. Something might have failed, so maybe they intended something but that did not happen. So there are two possibilities, right? That either they made a mistake or they
Yeah.
chose the right configuration, but somehow the right configuration did not get deployed. So That is one possibility. The second possibility is somehow the engines did not produce the thrust that was needed, because the engines needed to, one of the things we see from the video is the flight goes all the way to the edge of the runway, and it actually takes off from the edge of the runway, because you can see a lot of dust and like stuff which is flying, because the plane did not take off with a lot of space left in the runway. The plane takes off at the edge of the runway, which tells you that probably the plane did not get the kind of lift that it normally expected,
So
because
engines might be working, but they were not working 100% to their capacity.
so they were probably not producing
The thrust.
100% thrust, and somehow they took off. But maybe so when you are flying such a heavy plane, you have so much fuel, you have hot air, so probably they put the engine thrust to 100%, takeoff thrust to 100%, and maybe the engines did not produce 100% thrust, but that stress on the engines, probably the engines started underperforming even more. So the engines might have produced even less thrust after it climbed to like 650 feet or so. So again, one of the possibilities is maybe there was an electrical failure, or there was some other system failure, and somehow the engines underperformed. The engines did not produce the thrust. Now, one thing to keep in mind is this same aircraft, when it came before this flight, just the flight before, multiple passengers reported that there were electrical problems in the plane. The lights in the cabin were not working. There were
Air condition was not working.
air conditioning was not working. It was very hot. The in-flight entertainment systems were not working. So if you look at the electrical system which powers all of this, which were not working, it is powered by the same 235 volt main power system, which actually powers a lot of these components which might have gone wrong. And they are powered by the engine actually. The engines is powering the main 235 volt
Yeah.
electrical system.
People might have ignored this kind of thing like entertainment system, electricity, AC, because this is like a common pattern in Air India. I've traveled in Air India and AC never works, entertainment system never works, light sometimes never works. So that's why people might have ignored. But this is very like if this kind of scenario happened in like major airlines like Etihad or Emirates, then people might have concerns maybe. That's what I think.
So like an in-flight entertainment system not working, or a cabin light not working, they're actually cosmetic issues. So you are right, like an airline which prides itself in customer experience, they would ensure this never happens.
Yeah.
Right. I think one possibility is if there was an underlying electrical problem which manifested in this way, that a cabin system was not working, but actually it is the same problem which caused the crash. Underlying there was a big electrical problem, but maybe flight maintenance engineers thought it was a problem with some cosmetic systems like air conditioning or whatever. So there is a possibility that there was an underlying electrical problem which was there. So maybe nobody could correlate that what they were seeing happening in the cabin that would bring down the aircraft. So that is a possibility. So I think based on what we know from DGCA and based on the video evidence that we have, I think there are two possibilities. One is somehow the flaps were not right, and the second possibility is there was an internal error in the engine, not external error, not birds hitting, but something happened
Something going on in
internally
the engine. Yeah.
which might have happened. There is one other piece of evidence. So the one survivor who was a British national, that one survivor mentioned that he heard a loud bang. There was a loud explosive noise, and after that noise, the crash happened. So what was that loud bang? Was one engine or both the engines, did they go bad? But we did not see any smoke or fire. But the passenger said he heard a loud bang. So one possibility is if the passenger is saying the right thing, then one possibility is that some explosive bang happened and the engine stopped working. Now that bang might have happened within the engines, or that bang might have happened in some electrical system or some hydraulic system, who knows in what system, but some big fault happened and this caused this. So these are, I think, the probabilities right now. But the good thing is that Unlike MH370, which disappeared into the
Disappeared.
ocean,
Yeah.
we haven't found the black boxes after, like, I don't know, 10-15 years, how many ever years it is now, right? The good thing here is it crashed so close to the airport. There is video evidence, there is audio evidence, the black boxes, the flight recorder, everything is there. So I think we'll actually figure out what happened.
Yeah, and hope that this thing never gets repeated. Not sure who will take the responsibility, but I think the major thing goes to the airlines first, Air India. The second is Boeing is taking the like not taking the responsibility, but the thing is like they are the one that manufacturing the planes, right? So these two companies are mainly responsible, Air India and Boeing.
Yes, so Air India was operating the aircraft. They had their pilots, they had their cabin crew, they had their maintenance staff, right? So big responsibility with Air India. Then the plane was manufactured by Boeing. Big responsibility on Boeing. So we don't know what caused this accident, but it is a hard time for both Air India and Boeing. And the thing is that Boeing has been having a
But
bad time for some
hmm,
time. Like they had issues with 737 Max, and they had these whistleblowers who went and they said there was huge quality problems with 787 Dreamliner, and those whistleblowers said that the Dreamliners were not safe. And now we have the first fatal crash of a
yeah,
Dreamliner, right? They also said there were problems with the 777 program. So Boeing has been having a tough time for some time, and Air India haven't had a crash, but as you mentioned, AC may not be working,
yeah.
in-flight entertainment may not be working, maintenance, are they right? So I think it's a hard time for both Air India and for Boeing. I think what we can hope is whatever caused this crash, the investigators find out the reason, and if it is a reason that can be remedied, it gets remedied so that it doesn't ever happen again.
Yeah, that is true. Cool. I think that that's a very important point. As the time goes on, we will get to know the more root causes of this particular incident. But definitely, it's a very sad moment for the country.
It's a very, very difficult time for the whole aviation industry. It's a very difficult time for Boeing, for Air India, for all the passengers who fly. Maybe there would be so many passengers now who are really scared to fly a Boeing, or who are really scared to take a Air India flight, right?
Usually, one more thing I remember is flight travel is considered safest.
It is the safest statistically.
Even
Yeah.
going to the like going elevator up and down is also not considered that safe as compared to flight. Now we hear incidents like this once in every year or maybe two times every year. That scares the hell out of people. Like they always think double times. Okay, should they travel? First thing, should they travel with Air India? Third thing, should they travel with Boeing? So they have to now figure out all of that part, right? So I think that is something that there's no right or wrong answer. We just have to like apply our brain and see, or maybe minimize the travel for some time. I don't know, like what is the right answer.
No, I mean, this sort of an incident is an anomaly, right? Like Air India, if you look at the history of Air India, there was a time like Air India was founded by Jamshedji Tata, right? Now Air India is again with Tata. But when Indira Gandhi was the prime minister, Indira Gandhi nationalized Air India. Government took over Air India, and then Air India fell into bad times. But when Jamshedji Tata owned Air India was the best airline in the world. It was the most luxurious airline. It had the highest quality in every aspect of avionics, right? So Emirates, some of the other airlines,
Hmm.
which are now the standard bearers for quality or for opulence, for elegance, right? They all learned from Air India. But Air India, after it got taken over by the government, it fell into bad times, and now we associate Air India with poor quality and everything. But even then, one thing I would mention is if you see how many aircrafts are airborne, every day you have thousands of planes which are airborne, right?
Hmm.
So it is probably millions of flight it takes for an air crash to happen, or maybe the number is even more, right? So just because this crash happened, it doesn't ensure that we should fly less, or the flights are less safe. It's not like that.
Hmm.
This sort of a crash is one in a huge number,
Number, yeah.
right? But the thing is that if there is actually some underlying problem with Dreamliner, or if there is actually some underlying problem, systemic problem with the GE9X engines, which are the engines in the Dreamliner, right?
Hmm.
So if there is some problem like that, then all the Dreamliners, like 1100 Dreamliners, then you have to ground them, you have to
Yeah.
fix it, right? So it is very important as soon as possible investigators find out what caused this accident, because if this accident has been caused because of something to do with GE9X or with Boeing, then it is paramount all other aircrafts are fixed, because maybe there is some kind of a pattern which makes these planes or these engines vulnerable to that same problem again. So we don't want another crash to happen.
So thank you so much, Subhashish, to be in my channel. Basically, in aviation, every incident, no matter how tragic that is, it teaches us a lesson. AI171 reminds us of the safety problems that got happened with this aircraft. It's about the decisions, vigilance, and accountability at every level, from pilot to technicians to the regulator. For the families who left behind, nothing can undo this pain. But for the rest of us, this reminds us of a turning point, a call to improve systems, training, and transparency. We end this with a tribute to those we lost. Let's honor their memories with silence, respect, and a promise to strive for a safer skies. Thank you so much again for being with me until this point during this Soldem episode. If this message moved you, please like, share, subscribe to my channel. Let's stay informed, be compassionate, and hold system accountable. This is Manish signing off. Until next time, stay safe. Jai Hind, Jai Bharat.